Software supply chain attacks are continuing to expose vulnerabilities in organizations around the world. The time has come to focus your efforts on security for your software packages. Cloudsmith is the only cloud-native software package management solution for your enterprise. With Cloudsmith Continuous Packaging, you can securely deliver software across the globe and mitigate potential threats from entering your supply chain. With over 23 plus formats supported, Cloudsmith is the solution that engineers choose to safely deliver all of their assets. Reduce unneeded downtime and deliver with confidence. Start securing your software supply chain today by visiting securityweekly.com/cloudsmith. Looking to improve your web application security? Probly is reinventing web application security. Probly focuses on the vulnerabilities that matter, eliminates false positives with evidence-based scanning, and provides a simple point-and-shoot solution that is easy to use. Probly's thorough coverage ensures accurate identification of vulnerabilities in any modern web application or API. Improve your web application security processes by visiting securityweekly.com/probly and start your free trial today. Is your mobile app really secure? New vulnerabilities pop up every day, and malicious actors look for easy targets on app marketplaces to exploit. Securing your app's valuable IP and data is critical. GuardSquare's security solutions are built for developers and protect your app at every stage in the development lifecycle. Multiple layers of protection prevent reverse engineering and automatically detect tampering, making your app a difficult target for attackers. Learn more at securityweekly.com/GuardSquare.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. This episode brought to you by the number 8, such as the 8 schools of magic in D&D, or the D8 used for clerics hit points, which has nothing to do with application security, but somehow me, your host Mike Shima, and my co-host John Kinsella will see if we can bring that around to something topical and relevant. And while we're thinking of that on the fly, I have 2 announcements to go through. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on Digital Pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2021 to register now. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. Check out keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register for free and check out our killer lineup. And this, John, brings us to the news. And I suspect there's one article that we just have to get out of the way because I think you might be chomping at the bit to talk about. And it's a busy one. Yep, you know, I hear the sigh. You know where this is going. Microsoft opens up Excel to custom data types with images, arrays, and more. And they're doing it with, I keep forgetting to have the drum rolls here. So imagine the drum roll, if you will, for JavaScript. So what do you think about this, Mr. Kinsella?
I think it's a great idea. Actually, I've heard rumors that they're thinking about putting Node.js in there as well, so you'll be able to run a web server directly from within Excel. And then, we can just offer the whole goddamn thing up to the planet in general and not have to let people, worry about it. Just admit that it's public and we'll be done. How's that for a twist? Now that I've got that out of the way, I'm trying to keep a positive... Everyone's laughing. Not fair. I'm trying to keep a positive outlook on this and go, okay, maybe they're doing, you're adding a modern scripting language, so that's going to provide some sort of flexibility to folks. They had Bloomberg testing this, or that was their design partner. So there's uses for it. Okay, we get that. If you ever try to write a long macro in Excel, you know there's space for improvement. But this is the company that has TypeScript. And TypeScript, again, is not the easiest thing to use, so I get that. But this is also the company that has Power Apps and Power BI and VBA and all these other languages, which I think in many cases have a better history of security. And I think that even this is third of the problem here. It's more of, it could just be an image thing. They could be doing everything perfect in here. But unfortunately, so many of us have been burned, A, by Excel, and B, by JavaScript over the years, that we see this combination and we're like, no, hands off. So I'm trying to go, I'm waiting for this to come out, see what it looks like, what actually, what they're exposing, how it's being done. I hope they've done the right thing. I really, really, really hope they've done the right thing with this for their own sake. I was talking to, I'm not going to go into details. I was talking to another cloud provider this morning, and the comments was that they've got a hill to climb. So I'm hoping they get there. I want to see them do good. They've had a tough year. I'm trying to stay in that positive direction, and I hope this goes as well as possible for them and for all our users.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely pull us in that positive direction because I tend to perhaps err or other verbs on the side of optimism. But in this case, to me, it kind of makes sense. My facetious answer is that I'll be worried once somebody starts adding JavaScript to the browser, then we'll have real issues. Because in this case, if they are just doing with JavaScript functions and data types, that's not necessarily anything terrible. And quite honestly, I think we have more research into JavaScript engines, into language analysis for JavaScript than we do with Visual Basic for applications or the old school macros that they just got rid of. So clearly, everybody's snarky threat models are going quite directly to making outbound calls, basically getting to that network layer via JavaScript. And that obviously is something we wouldn't really want to do because that's going to introduce quite a bit of malware attack surface and unwanted programs within Excel or unwanted activity within Excel. But yes, like you say, hopefully they do it right because there's still historically a bunch of JavaScript exploits that have been based on manipulating array indexing, whether they're exhausting memory or doing some fancy building up arrays, popping objects into them, then pulling them out, triggering null pointer dereferences within those V8 engines, if you will. So there's clearly a history of problems here, setting aside the Excel aspect within just JavaScript itself. So something to keep an eye on. And we'll have fun throughout 2022. We'll see how many CVEs come through here.
I want to try and end this on a slightly again, hopeful note. If anyone to get the rant out of the way, I'm not going to rant here because if people want to see the rant, it was on my Twitter feed last week. But what I'd really love to see in 2022, this is what I'd really, really love to see, is a really great talk at one of our security conferences by someone from Microsoft telling us about all the amazing things they've done to secure this. That would make me really happy, and I'd love to talk about that on the show. So how about that?
That would be awesome. Yes, the MS Ignite, I suppose, is a bit more of a marketing, but maybe we see some blue hat or next year's black hat. That would be a great. What did they do to TypeScriptify? The JavaScript that's gone into Excel. There's a lot of strong typing that they may be able to do behind the scene or do some testing, or even some of my favorite topic, fuzzing. So that's pretty cool. You also set this up, I think, as a good segue for me to go back to a little bit of history. November 8th. 1996 was Frac 49 came out with a very famous article, Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit, which was basically about buffer overflows. A pretty seminal paper that popularized and was a great education on the basics of how the stack operates within computers, and then what happens when you start to have buffer overflow and underflow issues, and you can start to manipulate a whole bunch of data on that stack and jump into, start to play with function pointers. So you don't need to be a programmer to read it. You don't even need to necessarily, if you can understand pseudocode, you can understand, I think, the C that it's referring to. Don't worry too much about the assembly, but it's a great article that's just a good piece of InfoSec history. So wanted to throw that out since today marks the 25th anniversary of that article.
Yeah, happy memory. It's. I mean, this is where a large chunk of our, I think I'll say, a large chunk of our industry comes from right now. So this is definitely, at least glance over it and get a sense for what we were looking at, 25 years ago.
Exactly.
Sorry, and my tone changed halfway through that as I realized, wait, I was doing this 25 years ago. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, if you want to put yourself in the mood for it, throw on like No Diggity by Blackstreet. That was a top one in that era. Or if some other great music, Typo Negative released October Rust, August of that year, just to put a bit of history in there. Speaking of overflows, there is a Linux or a remote triggerable Linux kernel heap overflow in the TIPC module. And so this is one of the things I had to do a little bit of homework of my own just to get into what this TIPC module is. And it's basically for inter-process communication between clusters within a node. And so that's sort of what the use is for this. And it's used in a lot of apparently like real-time operating system setups. Apparently apparently, in the write-up from TIPC, they talk about its use even in what are they? Ericsson, Huawei, a lot of those types of environments. There's also a reference to Sikorsky aircraft helicopters. So TIPC it shows up in some interesting places. Now, what this vulnerability is a pretty classic abuse of header size and message size. So an attacker can basically craft a packet that's very small, and they found one of the field lengths that weren't being correctly validated by the recipient that says in this particular crypto packet that says, hey, let's exchange some crypto keys for AES. Here is a length field. Don't worry that this length field just so happens to be larger than the packet size I've sent you. The recipient says, oh, cool. I will set aside this memory. I'm going to go index into this packet length size you sent me, and oops, it went out of bounds, and game over, man, game over, to quote Hicks from Aliens. So that's the quick overview I wanted to throw in for there. I don't know that there's other things that are too exciting or insightful in that, other than, once again, a great write-up just to understand what was the thought process behind this.
Yeah. It's funny, I saw this one last week, and for some reason I just let it blow by without digging in, probably partially because I was busy. But we have to have some percentage of our audience that are going, how can you have yet another overflow in the Linux kernel? I mean, hasn't this thing been gone over with a fine-tooth comb by now? And I think that'd be interesting to talk about, maybe not right now, but at some point, like, okay, well, you got these modules which aren't going to get as much, I'll say, close attention as the core code is is receiving from Linus, but also and his team. But it's interesting to think about, right? This has to be one of the more studied large code bases out there, and we're still, all this time later, still finding issues. I didn't see. Was this introduced recently? Did you catch that?
I didn't catch that, but you did remind me there was, I'm going to hijack your stream of thought you reminded me of the other reason I wanted to highlight this. Right in the introduction, what's really cool is that the researcher was saying, I wanted to use CodeQL. CodeQL is useful for looking for patterns within code. In this case, they were looking for code smells, basically potentially insecure usage. And what their focus was, basically, I want to find all the locations on which a 16-bit variable is passed into kmalloc, and they had a hypothesis that the 16-bit value would be realistically easier to overflow than a 32 or 64-bit number, meaning this is the type of value that may be reflected in a package size, or maybe the type of number that you need to, influence for the receiver to basically to exploit. So this is a really cool idea that's saying, here's CodeQL. I have a theory. I'm just going to go find all the places where it might be a problem. And it kind of, I think, builds onto what you were getting at, John, in the sense of there's a couple, I think, 5 million lines of code in the Linux kernel or around the Linux kernel ecosystem. How do you go find out, where a misuse of kmalloc can be that can be exploitable and have a security problem? Having automation or tooling like CodeQL looks like it can be a pretty successful approach. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this, because I think that part is a great parallel, great lesson learned for others to apply to their own code bases. So that's where a good universal applicability is for this. So thank you for joining.
And actually, you just gave me another idea there too, to sort of bring it back to the homework assignment for our listening kids. Quite easy to grab a copy of the Linux source tree, or just have it on GitHub and go play with CodeQL, see if you can find this vulnerability. I mean, we've got a web page here with it being pointed out to you. So, close that tab, go over to GitHub, see if you can track this down. That's a little experiment. It's very free, very simple. I won't say it's simple, but it's free and it's there for you to do. So what can these tools do? How easy are they to use? Can you think about how you take that experiment, then go run it in your own code? If you happen to have kmallocs around or mem copies, but that's play with these things. Go and don't watch half an hour of TV tonight. Go and do that instead. Your significant other will be completely fine with it. They'll understand, and tell them it's a learning experience. And so bring them along. Maybe you can pair security research. How about that? Bring the kids. Be fun.
It'd be fun, and let us know how you did in our Discord channel, and feel free to tag John as well, and that way he can stop his half hour of TV and help you out if you get stuck. But before I put you too much on the spot, John, let me throw in a pair of articles that you highlighted. One about a bit of a snooze fest, but a tie into our last segment in the sense that 2 more NPM packages have been backdoored. So I don't know what the count is for this year, but it's definitely more than 2. And but also kind of a MITRE for malware project that possibly is applicable, not necessarily more on the malware side of things and not to NPM, but it seems like 2 great articles that go great together. Help me out here.
Mm-hmm. Interesting way to put it. Yeah, the node one, and like I was saying last half hour, I did grab my source tree. And I did find one of these. I'm not at a vulnerable version, but okay, how do you test that? And again, these are for some of us. I know I'm causing eyes to roll out there, but I'm trying to get everyone sort of up to the same speed here, right? So even those of us who've done this, for 25 years, okay, I know how to do it in Go. I can just go and grep and find the package, then look at its package JSON. How do I do it in Go? If I need to update this, and then the fun part comes, if I need to update this package, you've just got a dependabot alert. What else is going to break, right? That's the real fun part. We've talked about that before. But so yeah, 2 packages on NPM, Koa and RCE. Is that combined 23 million weekly downloads? So this is sort of used. RCE is used for a configuration of your application. And I believe Koa, command line arguments. These are both for more CLI type things than they are for your latest and greatest node-based lemonade stand. But so it's 2 more. The noise itself. There's Mike and I had links out to articles on this. I think it came out this morning. At least that's on my radar. In and of itself, you can go do the research and figure out and blah blah and see if you're vulnerable. But I think it's being able to quickly figure this stuff out, right? Because this is coming so frequently now. If you can go and look at your, grab one of your developers, or maybe you are a developer, or you know where the source tree is, go and take a look, see, are we vulnerable? Are we using this package? Are we using a vulnerable version? What do we need to do to fix it? In this case, it's roll back to an earlier version of each of these products. It's not a major change, so you should be able to do it quite easily. And then, once you've taken care of home and making sure everything's safe, go and look at the issues which were opened on these 2 projects, and people go see the initial. I think they were both publicly, how will I say, issues created publicly instead of reaching out to them on security. So you can go see someone going, hey, this version came out yesterday. It's got malware in it. Do you know about that? So you can sort of see how that actually happens in a public setting, which is a little entertaining as long as you're not the one trying to fix it. But yeah, that's that. And then on to the second one. Let's get a little more interesting. Mal API, MITRE for malware project, article over on Daily Swig. And really what this is someone's researcher is going through a bunch of C++ code for malware and looking at, on a Windows side, what Win32 APIs are being used. So it's basically, instead of, the comparison here, the reason MITRE is mentioned is that we talk about attack, and we've had this thing people yapping about for the last few years. But let's flip that bad boy around and go, okay, not so much what type of attacks are we seeing and what people out there are using those type of attacks, but what are they actually using to get that done? So on their website, if it's working, it was down earlier, malapi.io, they have a list of all these Win32 syscalls, or excuse me, syscalls. So you can go through and they're organized right now by enumeration, injection, invasion, spying, and internet. And they really need help with this list is the end point of this conversation here, both the story as well as for me. They're looking for help to work on this stuff. But you can go through and click and just go randomly pick something and say, I don't know, how about BitBlit? And you can actually click and drill down at that. Tells you a little bit about what it's for, graphic data call, GDI32 DLL. And then they'll have both the reference out to Microsoft documentation for that, as well as sample malware in many cases. So this one, I got one. It's out on GitHub, so you can actually go in there, look, and actually see how that code's being used, right? So that gives you a bit of a sense for how it's used in a bad way. So maybe what you've done, you've got some sort of, maybe how this be used in the real world, you've got some sort of binary in your system. You've gone through and you've looked up a bunch of the the system calls it's using, the Win32 calls, you see a call you don't recognize, come back into Mal API, see if that syscall is being used in a bad way. I mean, they have sleep as mentioned in here. I don't think of sleep as being, but yeah, there's a malware example using sleep, so probably something I've forgotten about, buffer overflow or something. But they've got a pretty good collection of stuff. You can go and see, okay, hey, is this legit, or is this something that's got a problem? And a call out back to our Discord, the Security Weekly Discord. Someone last week, I don't know if you saw this, Mike, over on, there's a questions channel we have. And somebody, I can't remember if they're a listener or not, but they posted, yeah, I think he is, posted a question of like, hey, someone's obviously trying to send me malware over an email, but I can't quite figure out what they're doing it. So I got them to paste a copy of it, and we started looking through and understanding how it was put together and what they're doing. So we are actually happy to talk about this stuff and poke around when you guys have questions. But that's the Mal API thing. It's pretty neat. It's obviously, I think, going to grow. I hope it's got a good, bright future ahead of it. It's still pretty young. But they'd love to get your help if you're, after you've done looking at the CodeQL stuff, you want to go and look at some Win32 malware. The guys over there on a Mal API will happily take your help.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how the attack framework is set up in this case, so that these APIs are listed under the basically the attack chain, if you will. Enumeration, injection, evasion. Which you're mentioning the sleep. This more comes in the aspect of just using sleep to say, sit tight, malware. Don't do anything for a few hours, a few weeks, so that some of the security controls that are watching this process get tired and go off and look at something else. So it's one of those things that you can also just look at this and reason through, how well are our controls? Are they more point in time? How continuous are they? What are the ways that they might be evaded, and do we have compensating controls to help that? So really great way to think through that. Really cool to highlight. I was also trying to think off the top of my head how to build that into a segue, but I don't have a good one. So I'm just going to say there's a booming underground market for bots. Now, this does have a tie into the NPM situation you were just talking about, because it was that NPM backdoor was unfolding in the public sphere because essentially it looks like the developer had their account compromised. And so steal some credentials, go modify the repo, and boom, it now is backdoored with some malware. This article from Vice is talking about additional bots and how attackers are now leveraging the OTP types of two-factor authentication and doing essentially real-time interception and replay, which basically bypasses which does bypass the security guarantees that are intended behind this type of 2FA. Now, a couple of things I wanted to highlight here. One is not so much that this aspect of 2FA is dead, because I want to step back to the larger picture and say, if the 2FA uptake is only in the order of something like 2% for your user base, you need, having problems with SMS, problems with TOTP aren't the fundamental issue you need to address here. You need to address how to get users onto a 2FA in the first place, which we see something like Google now doing with its with its user base, pushing on, I believe, 150 million users over the next year that they're going to be auto enrolling into 2FA. So that's a really great thing. And then I will say, yes, this is something to consider for your threat models. This is a great reason why I will continue to highlight and say, just move to those FIDO keys, move to those WebAuthn types of countermeasures, because those have much better cryptographic anchoring to your domain, to your username, or to your identity than things like this TOTP codes. And so that's sort of the perspective I went in when I was reading this article.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think you're spot on. Something's better than nothing. I think, at least personally, I believe the bigger issues with SMS as 2FA that we had over the last year, I think have been sort of mitigated through various laws in the US, along with help from the telcos. So I believe it's not nearly as easy to spoof now as it was, or intercept as it was at the beginning of 2021. So that there's some improvement there. Still not perfect. But so that's a bit of a help. But yeah, I mean, this is really just weaponizing that process, right? So that's sort of neat in and of itself. But yeah, no, it's start with some sort of 2FA, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm betting that it's easier once you have a user base which is using 2FA. It's probably easier to get them to move to something else. Now, the last thing I want to be doing is asking my users to change something, their security, how would I say, tokens every 6 or 12 months. That because then you're going to get just people annoyed at you, right? So if you can start with something proper in the first place, and I'm hearing more and more people, it sounds like more and more folks are accepting of having some sort of a soft token on the phone or wherever you have it. So that's probably becoming more acceptable as a base compared to becoming almost as acceptable as a base compared to SMS. But still, it really comes down to, what's the risk profile? What are you protecting? Do you need something a little better like a three-way handshake like Duo? Do you need the physical token? Do you need an actual challenge response if we want to go back? I'm sure someone's still doing that. But it really comes down to what are you trying to protect and what's going on with it, and then go from there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that is quite often easier said than done. And for those of you reading ahead on our show notes, might be seeing where I'm setting this up for our next article. But to stay on that 2FA for a bit too, is one of the aspects is you have to be careful about is not just shifting where the attack surface becomes. So we might have better login security, but what about account recovery? Because especially if you have those FIDO keys, it's a little piece of hardware that's pretty easy to lose, break, etc., or just not have with you. If you're traveling, you might leave it behind, and suddenly you're locked out of an account. And that account recovery and account security, then those business workflows need to be just as secure. Because if you, it's the classic. If you set up the login authentication to be great, but the account recovery is just answer what was your favorite band from 1996, and somebody answers typo negative, well, okay, that wasn't very helpful now, was it? You've just broken that process. And that is where I think I set up a segue, who knows? For HTTP is easy, just turn it on. This was a very short blog post from the BBC, but just talking about basically their journey to turn on HTTPS. And I liked it because it gave a good, call it DevOps side or practitioner side of responding to, InfoSec or AppSec coming by and say, hey, use HTTPS everywhere, just go do it. And that's a great thing to say, but there's a little nuances and there's things that can cause hiccups along the way. And this was just a really neat insight into and journey into that. That also, harkens back a little bit to the conversation we had around Let's Encrypt as well back in our last segment.
Yeah. I'm just scrolling back over it again. They've, complete aside, they've disabled, at least where my JavaScript is right now, they've disabled the scroll bar on the side. So when you said it was a short article, I thought it was, but it's not. It's actually not too bad. I finally got to the end. We've, and in full disclosure, this is what my new startup is doing, is trying to address this, but we've got a massive problem in InfoSec in that it's immensely difficult for even us in some cases to understand and deal with and work on this stuff. And we've talked about this for years of either the multi-hundred page reports or something as simple, which sounds like it is, should be simple, turning on TLS HTTPS. But real world versus is sort of like as we were talking about in the last segment of, okay, salsa sounds great, code signing sounds great, all these things we're talking about are amazing. By the way, how do I generate my SBOM? It's like, come on. And this is sort of, we have, and I think we're getting better at it, but still, this is just one example. And he's not even going into okay, well, you're using TLS, you're using HTTPS, but which version, what are your keys, there's all those sort of details on top of what's going on here. I don't know. I see progress, HSTS, that's just funny. But I think at the same time, we as an industry, we desperately need to figure out how to start doing this stuff in a way which is easier to consume by ourselves, not alone anyone else. And I know right now I'm just preaching to the choir, but that's really my driving force in life right now is just trying to at least help out some folks in that particular area.
It's a good driving force. And harkens back to, I think, some other conversations we've had too about, rather than have a long checklist about once you've deployed Kubernetes, or pick on any other thing, once you've deployed it, here is now the 30, 40-page checklist of how to harden it. Why aren't we just inverting that and say, deploy the hardened secure by default Kubernetes, or software stack of preference? And that's clearly, I think, where we need to be going a lot better. And clearly too, what's making John get up in the morning and look forward to the day.
Yeah, especially on days like today when I got up at 4 o'clock. I've been awake for 6 hours now. So guys, hopefully I'm still cognizant of my brain's working, but it doesn't feel like it on this side.
All right, let's see how that brain is working by forcing you to read some NIST documentation. Which in this case, I realize we might have a integer mismatch, with short versus long, 32-bit versus 64-bit paging here, and I'm running out of that metaphor. But in any case, NIST has unveiled a draft criteria for basically software labeling for consumer software, and it's another case we're highlighting this now. I think NIST is asking for industry feedback, commentary up through December. So here is your chance to make your voice known, or provide some feedback on what they're looking at. And at a high level glance, this looks like the types of labeling that it's looking for look like they're good seeds for creating or aligning your secure SDLC around, or making sure you have some tooling for. It's not prescriptive necessarily on how to do and what to do, but what stands out for me is it's just talking about, do you have a mechanism for vulnerability reporting? Do you have a vulnerability disclosure program? Okay. Does it tell you exactly how to set one up? It's not necessarily easy to do. There's some nuances, but you should have one. It does call out multi-factor authentication. So that's a good topical tie-in when we're just talking about the bots and, hey, use FIDO, have WebAuthn. And it also is just talking about, is it free, or how confident can you be to state that it's free from known vulnerabilities? And that speaks quite directly to SBOM, software composition analysis, that we're just talking about with Dan in the last segment, and that we've been talking about through the entire year as well. So the labels make sense to me. I guess my worry is, will it once again just be a list, and now we actually have to go do it in that BBC sense of, oops, now the DevOps teams actually has to execute, which that's where here be dragons.
Yeah, so the Daily Swig article actually reached out to a friend of the pod, Tim Mackey over at Synopsys, who we haven't had on for a while. Come on, Synopsys, send us some money so we can have Tim on again. But so to quote Tim, if the contents of the attestation are incorporated into procurement processes that businesses use for such a device, then more vendors will comply with the labeling requirements, which will limit the market for non-compliant devices. That's cool. I think when we first started talking about this process, towards the beginning of the year when we heard they were working on this, at least on my radar, this was being loosely based off what happened over in the UK. Their one, though, is targeted towards consumer retail IoT devices, right? They want us to be able to slap that label on the outside of the box saying, yes, this is the type of thing you should be okay having in your house. We're working with NIST here, so this is going to be more, at least initially, government-based. So that's going to be your procurement process there, Tim. But also on top of that, how does this play back into, there's two parts here. How does this play into retail space? Will something roll down from this? Good chance that happens a lot with NIST. The problem I'm seeing, and I saw a number a few weeks ago, I didn't think of quoting it or remembering it or putting it in the show, but we're seeing a huge number of consumer IoT devices show up in the enterprise. So, and one question there is, how is it even possible if you've got web or something going on, and how do you get that thing on the network? People should be recognizing that pretty quick, but that's not happening. So what we're seeing is I didn't get a list of what the devices are, but either webcams or thermostats or I don't know, your IoT toothbrush or whatever god names people have. These things which are designed for consumer use are showing up in an enterprise network. You can pretty much guarantee that's not going through a procurement process. So this stuff will definitely help, and I think if it does start squeezing those vendors to make something which is a little more secure, hopefully that will roll back down to retail, and then even the retail device does show up in your enterprise, it won't be a biggest deal. And that obviously, brings back the point of, are we ever going back into the office, and are we going to have to worry about that enterprise network anymore? And that's a whole separate, that's the new Security Weekly work from home show, right?
That's right. WFH, ASW. We'll have to work on those acronyms, make it a fun one. It did remind me just last week for listeners, if you missed last week's episode, we were talking about the minimum viable secure product, which I think also kind of leans into this space about what does the power of procurement imply, and how can that budget be weaponized, if you will, for the greater good to drive actual security improvements, because these are the baseline expectations for, the labeling says you actually have this. We're going to prefer to purchase this particular IoT device or just consumer software product versus another that is missing the label entirely, or, maybe that label isn't really well written. It's other than just, we take your security seriously. I think then I had another article. This was a week of the Daily Swig, I have to say. There was an article that was just an interview with a GitHub CSO talking about a lot of the journey to shifting left, and how, some practical advice on how they approached the helping with securing their supply chain setup. I just threw that in as a reference for people, as just kind of what are other opinions? What are other examples of how companies are tackling this? Thought that might be interesting. And one final thing I wanted to highlight is that this week, the Global AppSec US 2021 virtual conference will be going on. So haven't really looked at too many of the presentations yet, because I want to see them after the fact. But if you do watch any, or if you have any particular favorites, check out our, let us know on Discord, because we'd love to cover them, and we'd love to share both know what your opinions are, as well as share the ones that resonated and stood out for you. So that's my call for help from our listening audience. Anything else that you want to call out for our listening audience there, John, while we wrap up here?
I don't think so right now. I think we covered a bunch of really great stuff in the show for people to research. I see mentioned in the article with the GitHub CSO of CodeQL. So again, that's getting a lot of attention this week. Actually, going back on that one really briefly, it's, I think, something for people to think about. That's let's see if I get it right. No, I'm not going to. The Google minimum MVPS, minimum viable product security. Like I said, the brain's going. It's going to be a long day. But I heard more people talking about that type of thing and referencing it to me than I would expect. I heard investors talking about it last week. I've heard partners at other companies. I heard coworkers talking about it. All sorts of different people were talking about that type of thing. So pretty nerdy paper that I don't think got a lot of attention. Didn't get wasn't front headline page, but that thing really made its way around the world really quickly. So as you're thinking about how you communicate and how you do things, how did that get so effective so quickly? Or how did that get so much covered? How much exposure to such a wide variety of people? And then how can you make your communication be a little bit more like that? So that's my 2 cents for all listeners.
Awesome. Then I will end with a callback to the opening part of this segment. Maybe you don't make your dump stack charisma, put some points into that, and that's how you get your communication go. And so one final question, drop into the Discord and let us know is what D&D character class do you think is more the DevOps side or the AppSec side? Is it the cleric, the barbarians, the fighters? Who knows? But with that, I will say thank you for joining us. Thank you to John, as always. Thanks to everyone who was chatting with us live in Discord while we're doing this. We're going to see you next week on Application Security Weekly.